Very good question. I'll repeat the question just so everyone understands it, or if you didn't kind of catch it also for Karen. So Shiva in general, a person sits Shiva at 7 days. Shabbos, it says you can't sit Shiva. We have to celebrate Shabbos. We can't mourn. It's a mitzvah to be happy. So there's a pause in the morning. I should say in the public mourning, the way you would kind of present yourself. And so you continue right after Shabbos. Then you have holidays, though, and it doesn't do that. On a holiday, it says that if you hit a holiday in Shiva, let's say you started Shiva, Passover this year begins on a Monday evening. Let's say you start Shiva on Sunday or even Monday. You hit Passover, you don't resume Shiva afterwards. And so I don't know the exact answer. I'm going to share some of the ancillary parts to this. It says that Shiva is twofold. One is that people are visiting and comforting the mourners, but really it's actually parallel to a soul journey. The soul is ascending to heaven, and so that first 7 days are parallel to a 7-day ascension of the soul. And so a holiday breaks that because the holiday speed tracks that. So the soul, let's say what would take 7 days to get to its first, I'm going to say, level of its ascension. On a holiday, it puts that soul there. So it doesn't need 7 days, which is why we say when somebody passes away before a holiday, it's definitely a special soul. We say there's something unique about this person because they didn't need 7 days to get to that first kind of milestone of their ascension, of their journey. And so with that, I come back to this answer. It's like Shiva basically breaks at that holiday, even for the people that are mourning, because it's connected to the soul's journey. So that's my answer to you. But the holiday is unique in that sense. Shabbos doesn't do that.
But Shabbos is more important, isn't it? There's a holiday.
So yes, to a degree, yes. But meaning I'd have to look more on I know that there's a connection to this parallel. And so for whatever reason, holidays do that. Shabbos doesn't do that. I could Google that afterwards, see what textbooks they bring up for that.
But there's a psychological component to that.
Correct. So yes, one of them, how do I know this, right? There is for me, a very known letter. Again, I say known because I reference it all the time. People don't necessarily know about it. A woman lost her son in a car accident right before Rosh Hashanah, or right before Yom Kippur. The funeral is on the eve of, which means that she sat maybe for a half hour to an hour. And then Shiva's over. And she was very torn about this. She's like, where's my grieving process? Where do I get to kind of sit and let this process? And so she wrote a letter to the Rebbe about this. And as a complaint, it's not fair. Right? I want that opportunity to grieve.
Yeah.
And so his answer was all about the soul. His answer was like, think about how special your child is, right? So in other words, this is the Jewish law saying that your child didn't need those 7 days, and your Shiva is connected to your child's process. So Shiva was not only about the mourner, but it's very much about the mourned. It says that when you come to the house, you're actually comforting the mourned. Their presence is felt in the house. We don't necessarily see it. Right. Well, I don't know what that means, but
You're supposed to bring food in the house for them. You're supposed to comfort them.
for the people who have passed. No, but I'm talking about the mourned, not the mourner.
You know what?
So again, that doesn't make it necessarily easier for everyone, because some people feel like it's all about themselves and they're missing that. But they'll have the opportunity for an entire year to grieve, right? In the Jewish process, it's a mitzvah to mourn. So they still have that mitzvah throughout the year. It's the interesting thing about the Jewish mourning process is it's a stepping stone. I've once read this, and thank God I haven't sat Shiva, and hopefully for many, many more years, I won't have to. But there is this process that in the Jewish process, we want you to kind of climb out of it. We want you to come to a point, bless you, where you can get to a better place. That doesn't mean you are all finished with this and you wipe your hands, but a better place that you can kind of move forward, not move away from, but a new normal of sorts where you can participate in the daily living And we don't expect that overnight, although with the holiday, like you said, it's like, wait a second. We did expect that to a degree because you had 30 minutes to mourn maybe if the funeral was in the afternoon. But it is part and parcel and connected to the soul's journey as well. And so because of that, it's not going to be 7 days.
But it sounds hypocritical because the Jewish religion is a logical, it's a caring religion. And that's really not caring.
Well, so I think that I can't answer, obviously, a feeling question. I can share that the Jewish religion is not only about feelings, right? There's a reason. Think about it. Other cultures don't have mourning the way we do. They mourn, people mourn, but it's not like a designated, here's your mourning period. So ours is not, to a degree, you should kind of flip the script just a bit and say, hey, wait a second. Ours is not just out of thin air, 7 days. There's a reason why 7 days was the number, not 1 day or 2 days, because of the process of the soul. But I'll share something just very interesting on this same exact subject. What about somebody who has no mourners? A person passed away, no children, no parents alive,
I have friends here,
who passed and no,
3 years old. His wife had predeceased him. He had no children. And his siblings were born. I went to the funeral and his niece was very observant.
but she doesn't mourn.
And I said, where are you sitting Shiva? She said, there is no Shiva.
Right. So the Talmud has a very fascinating story on this. Wrap your mind around
Live
it.
with that.
Right.
Would it be all right with you, I said to her, if I said Kaddish? And she said, yeah.
Right. So I'll share the Kaddish part is still important, but that's not the Shiva part. Do you know what I mean? So I'll explain. There's a story in the Talmud that I find quite eye-opening that kind of talks about the soul side of this. So a person passes away in the Talmud in that era, and in the era of the Talmudic rabbis, he has no next of kin, no loved ones, nobody who is required to mourn. The rabbi in that story says, let's go make a minyan in this person's home for 7 days. We're going to come to this house. There's no one in the house that's family. And we're going to make the minyan in the house every single day for 7 days. He's like, wait, why? The reason is because it says the soul does hover and stay in that home for 7 days. It's a transition period. It's a very difficult time for the soul because it knows everything that it knew in life and living the way it did in this world, but it's now on a new plane. It's on a spiritual ascent. And so that soul is torn. And so by sitting Shiva, or I should say by us non-mourners visiting the Shiva home, we provide comfort to the soul. Our presence just sitting in the home provides comfort to the soul. So that's why I say, I come back to your question. I understand the emotional side of it. It's like, wait, where's my space? On the other hand, the number 7 didn't come out of thin air. It's connected to the soul. And so if it's connected to the soul, our sitting is fully connected to that. And so it might be difficult, which is why we still have the question, right? We still ask the question, wait, why is this family member or person sitting less than a day, and it's not fair to them? They don't get the visits. They don't get all those friends who will come and comfort them.
Process time.
But again, the process time will happen regardless if you're sitting in your home or not, right? Time is the time. On the other hand, yes, we are pushing that person back into a functional kind of mode before they might be ready for it. So, they'll take their own time on that side. But the mitzvah to mourn is connected to the soul's journey. And so when you have that understanding, it still might be difficult for someone to feel and actually do. But at the same time, you have a better understanding of where it came from to begin with and why it's shortened.
Okay, so now after those 7 days, where do we believe the soul goes?
First of all,
To heaven?
okay, the short answer to your question is not just 7 days, it's a year. And it's a year.
Yeah, but where
That's
is
the
it
Kaddish
for
side.
the 7 days?
Also, where is heaven? Where is heaven? Right? Technically, heaven is not a metaphysical It's not a physical thing. So heaven is anywhere. But let's talk about heaven in the heavens, right? Let's use that because that's metaphorically easiest for us to understand above us. The soul ascends to heaven, but it takes up to a year for the processing of the cleansing of the soul, right? Not punishment, but a word that I've found from another text, soul catharsis, the process of preparing the soul to kind of be in God's presence, but knowing that it lived a life that might have done a little bit of spot dirt on the soul. And so during that year, it takes that amount of time maximum to prepare the soul to be fully basking in the splendor of God. Garden of Eden, Gan Eden, as we say, right? World to all these different phrases that you'll find in Jewish texts. With that knowledge, though, it could take someone a day. We don't know, right? We're not spiritual mavens in that sense. However, we are very confident, and this is why Kaddish is only 11 months out of the 12, that no one needs 12 months. Only a truly wicked person would need the full 12 months, and we don't believe anyone is fully wicked like that, and therefore, we recite Kaddish for 11 months minus a day. We don't even want to touch that 12th month. Right? That's a very symbolic statement. So you had a question.
That's what I had learned, that you don't go for a year, because something hits a year, it's more like a permanent thing at that point.
So I wouldn't call it that. It's more about do you have to do the full time or not? Right? We're kind of making a statement about a person if we did 12 months. In fact, in Jewish tradition, then I'll take the rest of your kind of question. In Jewish tradition, if somebody had committed suicide, I'm not talking about today, in the olden days, right, before we knew about mental health. If somebody had committed suicide, they wouldn't be buried in the main part of the cemetery. They're kind of put on the side. Correct. Outside of the main area is what I want to say. And they would traditionally tell them to actually say Kaddish for 12 months, right? This person needs extra. We don't do that anymore. Some people even do that for cremations. If it's not if it was chosen. I'm using that as the example, but again, these are things that depending on who your rabbi is and how they guide you, 11 months is probably standard, but you will find communities that's very black and white. Like that is wrong. We're going to do 12 months. So I don't, if that is a situation that comes up, they talk to their own rabbis. I don't share what people should do. But you had a follow up on that?
Well, the question, paying somebody to say
Where does that come from?
And what the impact that somebody, you have to pay somebody?
Okay, you don't have to. Okay, good question. So we have a tradition, we recite Kaddish for 12 months, 11 months, right? And that is to help the soul, right? The Kaddish is to help the soul. It says that one less person is praising God in this world. So the family will recite the Kaddish on that person's behalf, and it helps the soul. That doesn't mean that Kaddish is the end all be all best thing to do for the soul. In fact, it's not. The greatest thing that you can do for the soul is charity and study in their merits. Charity and study. Those are the greatest gifts that you can give to a soul. However, Kaddish is also something we do. But because of that, because people want to say the Kaddish every day and they might not make it to services every day, it's quite a commitment and it's a life-changing thing if you weren't a minyan goer. So there is a tradition that I say tradition, people do this. It's not a tradition. People will pay someone else to say the Kaddish every day. Now, even if you're doing Kaddish every day on your own, you still might pay someone just in case you miss a day. Right? So this way you feel less stressed if you're running late or you're traveling and you think there will be a minyan, or maybe you went to a synagogue and that day they couldn't get a minyan. That happens. So you have a backup. Like I have a cousin in Brazil, Connie's cousin, that I get text messages every blue moon. He's like, can you say Kaddish at Mincha and Mariv, meaning the evening service? Because they didn't have a minyan in Brazil where he is. And Arizona's much later, so I'm a backup. But it's because we want to do the best that we can for this person, because that person can't do it on their own anymore. So they rely on their loved ones.
You're gonna have to do a minyan.
I do minyan every day. Yeah. So even though I say twice a day, it's 3 times if you think about it. Because the afternoon and evening are done one right after the other, at least here in Phoenix. If you go to New York but you can find synagogues that have multiple, yeah, because like maybe they did the afternoon service at 4 or 5 and come back at 9, depending on the town. There are shuls here in Arizona that definitely have multiple minions because of the amount of people they can do that and know that they'll have for each one, or a lot of visitors. Yeah.
Does it count? Let's say you can't physically do it, but if you belong to a congregation that announces the name.
For Kaddish, that would count.
Does that count?
Yeah. The idea is that someone is doing it in their merits. So a child, this is something I find very fascinating. I kind of appreciate. A child who does something for their parents doesn't have to specify they're doing something for their parent, because every single thing that a child has learned, when I say child, they could be 60, 70, 80 years old, right? They're doing it for a parent. But everything that they have learned is because of their parents. We connect it. So they don't have to specify I'm doing this in merit of my father, or of my mother. But someone who's not a child of this person, they would specify I'm doing it for that person. Parents always get the benefits of the kids' good actions. The nachas, right?
I have a question.
Yeah.
What is Kaddish? Because I've read the English translation, and I'm trying to understand how this applies to someone.
Right.
Passed away.
So I kind of
Praising God.
alluded to that on purpose, right? The Kaddish doesn't speak about death. It doesn't speak about anything of death. It just praises God. And so the idea is one less soul is doing it, we're doing it on their behalf. So we are praising God on their behalf. We're adding that extra praise.
It's not even Hebrew.
It's Aramaic because that was the language that people understood.
Yeah, but here's the deal. If heaven forbid, someone is tragically killed, auto accident, whatever. Why am I praising God that?
So again, you're not praising God that they died. You're praising God on their behalf.
But why is
they-
one person praising God?
We all praise God because we exist, right? The world runs. We thank God for each moment that we're alive. We thank God for, it's part of our celebration of the soul being a gift from God coming onto this earth. We're not praising God because something that we see as bad happens. And we have to, although to be honestly clear, there is 100% a point of mentioning that everything in this world is good. We don't always see the good, right? God is good, right? So therefore, everything that happens in this world is good. We don't see it, which is why we mourn, which is why we react the way we react. But on a truly, I'm going to say, spiritual conversation, we would say everything that happens in this world is for the good. That's why the blessing for death is, blessed is the true judge. We might not see it, but God is the true judge and knows a person's time, knows what our purpose is, that we fulfilled it or not, right? That now we're going into a more philosophical conversation about why we're here, what our purpose is. If someone dies young, to use the quote, right? We all have a different definition of what young is. Did they live a shortened life? Or was that a complete life? Right? We naturally would say it was shortened before their time. They died before their time. So these are normal conversations that we have in our minds, and we talk with others and we grieve through that. And maybe 50 years down the road, we have a bigger picture about the world and God and mission, and we'll come to a different conclusion. But in the moment, we see it black and white. This person did not live the 90 to 100 to 120 years. And we're like, that's not fair. Or if they pass away, like you said, tragic car accident. It's like,
My son-in-law died at 39 from a sickness.
right. No, I think we would all say that we all feel the same way when we know the story. So that's why I don't answer for God. It's not our job is not to answer for God. And our job is not to answer. Look at Moses and Aaron have a conversation, last week's Torah portion. Aaron's 2 sons die. This is the ceremony of opening up the tabernacle, and Aaron's 2 sons die. And Moses speaks up and says, it goes to show how great they are that God they were sanctified here. They're greater than us. That's why God chose them. And Aaron's silent. Doesn't say a word. And if you think about it, that's the greatest lesson in helping people grieve is not to give explanations and answers. It's just stand there with them. So I don't give answers for God. I don't have the answers.
Oh, I
But
thought you were God.
I'm working on it.
Didn't Kaddish start from students, for their teachers?
Teachers, I don't know. I'd have to look that one up. It's possible. I don't know. Yeah. We're gonna get to the eclipse and to Passover. Don't worry.
I wondered.
It doesn't have to be quick. My answer might be quick.
In traditional Judaism,
Yes.
women do not participate in the service.
Is that true?
In what service?
I know what you're saying. I'm questioning it on purpose. Do you mean, are they counted in the minyan or do they come to the minyan to participate? Okay.
Separated
Okay.
from men.
Oh,
Yeah, that he phrased it on purpose. Okay, so yes. Can they say Kaddish?
And funeral. Is being a pallbearer have any connection to that women should or should not?
Okay, I thought you were gonna go with a much more difficult question for me. In traditional, I say in Judaism in general, can a woman be a pallbearer, right? There's no Jewish law that says a woman cannot be a pallbearer. There would be societal norms of modesty that would answer a question like that, kind of like you'll have to see what each community does. I'm just gonna share something that meaning it's not a red line in the sand, she cannot or can or whatever. There are very strong, I'm going to say, teachings about modesty at funerals because it says the evil inclination is quite strong at a funeral.
define modesty, please.
Meaning, should men and women do things together or things like that? And if you're a pallbearer, if it's all women, would that be a question differently than men and women? So I'm not going into that part because there isn't a law that says you cannot or can. But
You cannot.
I said there isn't a law that says cannot or can, but I'm just going to share something interesting to give you a better understanding of how many traditions there are within honoring and respecting our loved ones and the process of the funeral, which includes a lot of these details. My grandfather passed away. It's my first family funeral, if I can say it like that. And they tell us that, oh, none of the family follows the casket. That means even the drive from the chapel to the funeral, you don't go the same route. Okay.
Never heard of it.
That's why I'm sharing this. There's a lot of traditions. Say, okay, that's number one that they say. And they say that includes grandchildren. I'm so, oh, I'm not considered a mourner, right? This is a grandfather. Then they come to the funeral. None of the family will use the shovels. Again, same idea. Why is that? Either because we're the mourners and other people should be doing the work for us, or maybe shoveling dirt onto even though it's a mitzvah. And obviously, if there was no one else, you would do everything. We're talking about when there are others in a community to help. So these are traditions. That's not something that you have to or cannot do. These are just traditions in respect or in the laws of mourning of not doing anything. The mitzvah is to mourn, not to do anything else. So again, I share that because there are so many traditions within that I wouldn't even try to answer that question.
That's not fair to you.
Why not?
And I'm talking personally right now. Because I don't know firsthand, but I read some beautiful articles that were written after your grandfather passed. And I know.
Well, that was my grandmother.
Your grandmother.
Right.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Because we didn't know each other yet with my grandfather. I also wrote for the grandfather too, but
Okay. But there was some really special connection there. And to say that you can't mourn.
it doesn't say you can't mourn. In fact, I look at these traditions as actually very powerful. It just shows how close you are to it's not just the child that is mourning and they're mourning with a torn clothing and sitting Shiva, but even the grandchildren are mourners to a degree, just not to that extent. I found it quite powerful. It's like, wow, you're really connected, even though you're a generation later and say, no, you're not a mourner, right? That's the traditional thing. The child is mourning, not the grandchild's, right? The child sits Shiva, the grandchild doesn't. And this is saying, no, there's an extent of mourning for the grandchildren as well. Not just that they're grieving, but like even in the actions. But again, these are traditions. Or that if the mourners can't do it, even the grandchildren can't do it. It's pretty powerful.
And not,
Meaning if they cannot do something because they are mourning, and you say the grandchildren cannot either, that's pretty powerful. Right? You know, and instead of saying you're like everyone else, no, we identify and understand that they're mourning and they're part of that mourners to a degree.
so I didn't understand that you came back so quickly. And
I don't sit Shiva.
now I
Right.
get it.
Yeah. So, okay, now switching to the eclipse and then to Passover. I shared this yesterday with someone. I went to a community, I had a discussion, and obviously the eclipse is more important than the discussion because honestly, it's a once in a generation phenomenon. I encouraged everyone to go look at it. And so we're outside and then we come back inside and I said, you know, what's the Jewish take on this? Now, the Jewish take is a very tricky question because the phenomena has nothing to do with my actions or your actions. This is a celestial orbit. This is how the planets work and how the sun orbits and the moon. So exactly. So like, how could we ask what's the God take on this? That's just how the orbit works. But on the other hand, there's an opinion that says that an eclipse is a bad omen. A solar eclipse is a bad omen for the universe. A lunar eclipse is a bad omen for the Jewish people. Okay. Why would the lunar eclipse be for the Jewish people? Because we are compared to the moon. In fact, I read something that kind of flips the script on this, and I really liked the message on Friday. I was reading different like rabbis' weekly emails. And one of the emails was, take the solar eclipse as a beautiful message about the Jewish people. You know, a lot of people look at what's the world saying about Israel right now. The sun are those people. The sun is like the United States, the big, powerful light luminary of the world. And they're saying that Israel's in the wrong and they shouldn't go in to do this and they should cease fire, all these things that disregard Jewish life and safety. Black and white to me and to many people, but clearly on some of the larger voices in the administration, it's not coming out so clear. Or used to, but not anymore. And so people say the sun, it's the powerful one here. You got to do what the sun says. Comes the solar eclipse to remind us that sometimes the moon outshines the sun. Sometimes the moon blocks the sun. Right? That's really what went on. This idea that the Jewish people have to do their thing, right? That sun is always strong, but don't forget the moon sometimes covers it over. And at one point in the future, the sun and the moon, which used to be equal luminaries in creation, that's what it says, the sun and the moon were equally bright. And then God diminished the light of the moon, and it waxes and wanes. That process will eventually be equal again. The moon will be at its height, meaning the Jewish people will be strong and be that bright light. So there was this beautiful message of like the solar eclipse, this message of hope and strength for the Jewish people. So I come back to the Talmudic passage that says the solar eclipse is a bad omen. It causes a propensity for sin. Now, I don't know if it means during the exact moments. I'm just saying, like, but the idea of the solar eclipse to the world is that it's a bad omen for sinning. So that's number one. But like I've shared here, and I know it's the Jewish take on, in general, about horoscopes and the zodiac, right? These might be signs that say a person who is of that sign will be X, Y, and Z, more murderous or promiscuous or whatever the signs mean, right? I shared two of the negative ones just for sensationalism. But it doesn't mean that a person will do it, right? We have free choice, but it might push somebody. You might have a propensity to do that, to do something negative. That's the idea of the eclipse. In other words, it doesn't force me to do anything. But somebody who's, going through that tough rut in life, that might be the push. And then they have to either make their choice to do it or not to do it. So the solar eclipse is part of the zodiac signs, and where we say the planets are my mazel. To go back to something that I've shared here, when you say mazel tov to somebody who is about to have a baby, we look at it and it means congratulations, right? We don't mean Anything more than congratulations. The original Mazel Tov meaning, though, has nothing to do with congratulations. It was a sincere wish for the family that is going to be having a baby, that the baby is born in a good, auspicious mazel. There are 7 planets in the signs that go by the hour. Depending on what hour you are born in is your mazel. They don't go by the monthly horoscope in the Jewish Talmudic texts. And so if you are born in the mazel of planet Mars, for example, it is a not good sign. It is a red sign. It says somebody born in that hour has a propensity for murder, for blood. And so there are 2 ways that a person born in that hour can go. They can go to that negative side, or they can take that same energy and direct it to something positive. What would be a positive bloody thing? An occupation as a surgeon, an occupation as a slaughter, an occupation that works with blood, but a phlebotomist, using that example. On the other hand, they might have a propensity for murder, and we got to channel it so that they don't end up killing people. So it doesn't force you to do anything. They're just signs, people that might tweak that direction. And so on a day of the eclipse, for people who are conflicted, it might have given an extra magnet to whatever direction wouldn't be a positive one. It doesn't control you. But that's how the Talmud looks at a solar eclipse. It has a bad negative magnet that pulls and draws people the wrong way. And so you got to put your feet down and say, I am not going in that direction. If that was somebody who would be affected by that. That doesn't mean everyone is. It doesn't even mean 10% of the population. It's not about the numbers. It's about the idea that for people who are very into their horoscopes and into their mazel, they are concerned that this is negative. In fact, when you read about it online, nothing to do with Judaism, I read other texts that talk about that. I didn't look at the horoscope.com to see what they write, but it's just an interesting idea that if you are a believer in the stars in that sense, and throughout our history, we see many people are. In fact, I think I shared this here, but if I didn't, I always found this quite fascinating. The first nation that attacks the Jewish people is Amalek. So Jewish people leave Egypt. The first nation that attacks us is Amalek. They are the nation that Haman comes from. They are just haters. And so I had read this year and I found it fascinating. What did they do to win the war, which they lost? What did they do? They went into their horoscopes and they only selected soldiers, bless you. They only selected soldiers that did not have a horoscope reading to die within the year. So said they're going to be more successful because they're not meant to die this year, right? They use their stargazers and whatever else. It says the Jewish people, because of knowing that they were using this type of thing, also had to fight, kind of in that mindset too, and chose their soldiers the same way. So you'd have an equal ground. Why do I share that? Not because you have to believe in it or not. It's just fascinating how far back this goes. Stargazers. We know that in the story of Egypt, where Joseph ends up with the stargazer, the guy has a dream and it's believed. Like it's no question that it's being believed. So it is people have always believed in these signs. We as Jews, though, it says we shouldn't believe in the signs. We're above them. But if you believe in them and you allow it to affect you, it will affect you in that direction. You just have to know that you're stronger than that. And even if it says that this is a bad day for you, you have the power to overcome it. That's the idea.
Does that fall under superstition?
To a degree.
So now what about
But
lunar?
the lunar, it says the Jewish people have to worry about. But probably in the same idea. Now, again, there's nothing we did to cause that. It's just how the world works. It's how God created the world. But again, that it doesn't make you do anything. It gives you that propensity to do something. That is the eclipse bad omen. But it doesn't mean I wasn't worried. Do you know what I mean? I'm not worried about these things. I make my own choices, and that's kind of how it works. Yes.
In the book East of Eden, have you ever read
No.
it? There is a full passage about free will. Thou mayest, thou shalt, and it's really enlightening.
What does it say?
Well, what happens is it's a Chinese man who's been taking Hebrew for a year so that he could read all the teachings in the original Hebrew.
Right.
And the bottom line is that he believes that it says thou mayest, which means we have free choice, not thou shalt.
Even if it says thou shall, it's about free choice.
Well, that,
Right? You should. What will you do? That's up to you. I will tell you that the basic premise that you find in about free will is you cannot be rewarded or punished if you didn't have free will. Right? Because then we're talking about hunky-dory. It makes no sense to say, oh, you just hit somebody, but I forced you to do it. But I'm gonna punish you for that. Right? You can't be punished for something you're forced to do. You can't be rewarded for something you're forced to do. So there is a premise that if we have a Torah and mitzvot that tell you reward and punishment for doing it or for not doing it, there has to be a premise that you had choice in that. And so that's important. So Maimonides, when he talks about the idea of repentance, his first thing that he settles before he talks about how to repent, what it is, and that God gives us the opportunity, he first starts off and says, you have free will. Because if you don't believe you have free will, what are we repenting for? Right? Why ask for forgiveness if you didn't have a choice in the matter? So it is important to kind of have that. I'm going to kind of switch to Passover, not because we needed an hour to talk about Passover, but to kind of share, I think the most important thing that we walk away from here is regardless of what you do for Passover. I share this every year, so it's not a new message. I share this with whoever I speak to. Regardless of what you do for Passover, whether you're doing a Seder or not doing a Seder, you can still celebrate Passover in a very meaningful way. And in addition to that, I'm hoping to just share one thing, and that is that even if you do the Seder, I'm not talking about if it's done right or wrong. We're not even going to the details. The mitzvot of Passover begin at night because it says we left Egypt. The Passover Seder is based off of the Passover sacrifice, that we were given a commandment to eat the Passover sacrifice at night. We were given a commandment to eat matzah at night. We were given a commandment to eat the bitter herb at night. Those are the three basic kind of eating mitzvot that come from the Torah. And we were also given a mitzvah to tell over the story of Passover at this dinner. And the dinner became known as the Seder. It became known as the Seder because the Seder was the rabbi's way of teaching us during this dinner, get these things done. The order of the evening, 15 things that you'll do. It's not long. It kind of feels long to many people. In fact, I was sharing with somebody, if you grew up on the East Coast and you always felt like your Seder ended at midnight, which it did, and therefore you have this stigma that Seders end late, and I don't want that for my kids. I want it to be enjoyable, etc. It wasn't because that Seder was long. It's because that Seder started at night. And if you live in New York, night, not sundown, nightfall. So you grew up very traditional. Your grandfather, everyone tells me my grandfather was a rabbi or blah, blah, blah. Then I can promise you they started their Seder at night. New York nightfall is like 8:40.
well, what do you mean, night?
Nightfall, not sundown. The mitzvah of the Passover sacrifice was to eat at night.
So the 3 stars.
3 stars.
Oh, so sundown.
So sundown is when it's sunset.
I see.
There's like 40 minutes in between that, typically, or more.
There's a prayer, at least in the Reformed Kabbalah, and it came to pass at midnight. And it lists all these things in the last.
Right, because it says the 10th plague happened at midnight and the Jewish people left right out at midnight. So that is why that's part of the story of the Exodus. Right, at midnight we ran out. There's a song my kids sing from school, Pharaoh in pajamas in the middle of the night. Right, Pharaoh kept on saying no, 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 and then the 10th plague is like, wait a second, I'm a firstborn. and they're all dying around me. I'm next. So he got very nervous. He's like, get out before I die. That was at midnight because Moses pointed to the sky. It says that at that time is when this will happen. So coming back to the Seder, I'm sharing that regardless if you start your Seder at 4, 5, or 6, because that's what a lot of people do for family.
Kids can't be up, the kids aren't gonna be up.
Well, to be honest,
Be there.
correct. To be honest, for that little detail, we can, that's how each family will make it happen. We're luckier, right? Nightfall here is like 7:37. So let's say a Seder is a 2.5-hour experience, let's say, even on the religious growing up in New York, if you started at 8:45, you finished at midnight, pretty much. And it felt like forever.
Things will be
Right.
embellished.
So I share that, and I share this every year, and I think it's important. Regardless of when you start, you did things for your family. You can still tell people, hey, on your way out, grab a bite of matzah. Because they'll probably be leaving your house after 7:37. Right? Because then they're doing the mitzvah of matzah at night. Every single thing we do is a mitzvah on its own. It's a beautiful thing on its own. So regardless if you're at the Seder or not, that matzah after nightfall is a mitzvah. Same thing, and I'll take in a second. Same thing is if you had extra time and you read the story of the Haggadah after nightfall because you had a minute. Usually if you hosted the Seder, you don't have a minute afterwards. But let's say you have that minute, you have now done another mitzvah, which is telling over the story at nightfall. So I share this not to tell you or anyone else that they're doing it all wrong. What I'm trying to share is that you can still make it meaningful now that you know this little detail. I always share this story. My father, when he first moved here, he had a person that after my father finished his Seder, he went to that guy's house and the guy offered him a beer. Beer is not kosher for Passover. And my father just politely said, no, thank you. The next year, that guy goes through a Passover class and he learns beer is not kosher for Passover. And so he realizes that my father didn't tell him off. He just, he was very respectful about it. And so I share this, we learn things in life over time. And that doesn't mean that everything you did before that was wrong. What it means is that the next time you could do one more thing better. And so regardless of what time you start your Seder, or if you're even having a Seder, at nightfall, eat a piece of matzah, and you have done the biblical mitzvah of eating matzah on Pesach. The rest of Passover, we eat matzah because we can't eat leavened bread, but it's no longer a mitzvah. The mitzvah is at the Seder night. So both nights. So I share that because some people feel like they sold themselves short. Sometimes you feel like because you didn't do a Seder at all, or because you're doing the Seder earlier for family, or like someone else just told me they're doing the Seder on Saturday because it works better for their family. And so it's a nice thing to get together, but we're forgetting the soul, right? We're forgetting the why we do this. We don't do it to get together with family. We do it because it is a way that God asked us to celebrate the Exodus and the miracles. And so it's a relationship thing. So it's still a nice thing to get together with family. But the more important thing is the why. The why was because God said you should have a Seder. You should have a Passover festive meal where you eat matzah, have the Passover sacrifice, which we don't do anymore. So we have a symbolic thing on our Seder plate. But again, regardless of what you're doing, you can still do these things. I think it's so important. And in fact, we share, and I think the email will be today or tomorrow. And I do this again closer to Passover. But a very brief Haggadah, an essentials Haggadah, where it takes out all the extras, but it will have the biblical, if you read this, you have fulfilled it biblically. Short, to the point. Like when we do the Seder, just to give you an example, even though we might start it earlier, and I'll tell you how we do that in a minute, and still read some of the Seder Haggadah passages, we're doing more than even the bare minimum because Dayenu, for example, is not a required reading biblically. Neither is the 10 plagues. But these are things that if I didn't do it, people are like, wait, you sold me sheep.
The idea is to teach your children
Correct.
the basic, and if you eliminate it, then how are they going to learn?
Who asked you to teach their children?
It says right in.
No, I'm sharing, I'm coming back to the why. God asked you to teach your children. So God gives you the kind of the mandate of how to do it. So if you don't work within his framework, you're doing it for yourself, not for God. Meaning we can feel very good. I did the Seder early because of my kids. That's very beautiful. But it lost the why component. It kind of goes back to the Shiva part, right? Why am I sitting 7 days? Because God said you do it for this reason. Or we don't have the reason necessarily, but we connect the reasons afterwards, right? But again, this is not to mock anyone who does it. This is to add an additional way to celebrate the God mandated way. Now, before you start, I'll tell you how we do the short one, and then I'll take your question. So how can you do it where you start earlier, but you still get the Seder in correctly? So obviously you have to be ready to kind of know what time nightfall is. What we do is we'll do a lot of the meal before that and the Seder afterwards. We do the meal first, Seder after, which is not the way it is in the order of the Haggadah. Because in the Haggadah, the meal is step number, let's say 12 or 11, whatever it is, right? You know, you have to do those 50 pages before that. So it's
We want more patience.
correct, but it does, there are reasons why the meal isn't first either. So we still leave one course to happen in the Haggadah, in the middle of the Seder. But let's say you didn't do that, at least you did everything else, right? Let's say you got all the food in before, and you have to do like I know everyone's thinking here, what works well. You can't change on your family overnight because they'll think you became a crazy. It's like, who's this rabbi you're talking to? Stay away from him, right? So, you know, it's about adding meaning. And maybe the next year, as your kids are older, you say we're starting 30 minutes later, right? It's not, no babies involved. You do what works well, but you try to infuse it. That's kind of how I share that, yes. And then I'll take yours after.
So you said bitter herbs is an important part. Why do some Seder plates have 2 spots?
Good
for
question.
bitter herbs?
Okay, very good question. On my Seder plate, I have 6 items on the Seder plate, and other people have 5 items. The real reason is you're using the bitter herb twice. Once on its own and once in the sandwich. And so they just have it twice on the Seder plate. If I had only 5 on the Seder plate, I would just have to have that doubled, right? Because I got to do it again. Right, a double stack, exactly. But that's the reason, because it is going to be twice. You had a question, Jeff.
In Chicago, I had a young fella who was traditional family. And they all lived in the same neighborhood. There were 5 or 6 kids. And they would only change one house for Pesach.
Everyone went to that one.
Everyone, is there something that it requires, or that people who, that they have to?
Right, okay.
Own house?
You're actually, this should have been part of, not specifically your question, but that's all should be one of the most important things I can talk about here, and we all can do very easily. Okay. So Passover has a mandate, has a number of biblical commandments. Of those commandments, it says you can't have chametz you can't own it, you can't enjoy it, you can't see it, shouldn't find it. And so part of that process is how we kosher our homes, we get rid of all of our chametz, we clean up. So Jeff's question is like, let's say I go to a Passover program, and I'm calling that a Passover program. One house is the resort. That's where all the food is. The other 6 are the bedrooms, right? They happen to have kitchens, but we're not using them. So is it a mitzvah that I kosher my home? Or is it enough that I kind of clean up the surfaces? I don't see it. And I'll get food from wherever else. I don't need to worry about my kitchen. And so the answer is it's fine to do it the way you just described it, where I'm not using my dishes. I've closed my kitchen. If I own chametz, I sell it. I don't own it anymore. Or I got rid of it, however I did that. I don't have to have my kitchen kosher for it. I can't use it. I don't see chametz in there. I can't use it over Passover, even if I did. So what I will kind of end on that point is, nevertheless, I shouldn't own chametz on Passover. And I have utensils that kind of have chametz absorbed into their walls. So the solution to that was either you koshered them or you sold them. right? And this includes crackers that you have in your pantry and everything else. So I am actually going to suggest that after we finish here, and I'll have a link in my email as well, you sell your chametz. It is the most simplest process. You don't pay, you don't receive money, but it's a legitimate sale that happens with a contract that will be sold to a non-Jewish person who will own your chametz on Passover. And the truth is, if that guy wants to come to your house and buy it, he can, right? He has to call you and say, hey, I want to see what you have in your pantry. But he will pay full price, right? There is no incentive. There is no incentive for this guy to come to your house and now take your alcohol that is the most expensive bottle, right? You have that $2,500 bottle in your house. If he takes it, he's paying $2,500. So you're not going to lose off that. But the way the sale works is there's an actual down payment, right? He gives whoever the rabbi or agent that sells it. There's a real sale going on, a contract. And so this absolves you of owning chametz on Passover. And it's easy. And I will tell you that big companies do this. Champy's sells their chametz, for example. Why? Because if they don't, after Passover, we cannot benefit from their bread until they've gone through their entire stock of bread that was owned on Passover. So if they constantly are baking and it comes onto the shelf in the supermarket a week later, I wouldn't be able to eat that because it was owned by a Jew on Passover. So that's one of the examples. There was a very big beer company, not beer, a wine and spirit distributor in New York that over the last couple of years, this is actually through Thani's uncle's connections when he was working for another beverage company that was owned by a Jew. People found out, it's like, wait a second, his items are coming up in supermarkets all around the tri-state area for the next month of inventory that he owned on Passover. It's Jewish owned. The Bible says you can't have any benefit from that. So they got him to sell his chametz. There are quite a few bourbons and whiskeys that even though the ingredients are kosher, it says not to buy it. Why? They're owned by Jews. And they're sold, obviously, many years later. It's in a barrel for who knows how long, aging.
Right.
And so it ends up being that you can't benefit off those, you can't drink it because it was owned by a Jew on Passover. Yes.
Okay. Back in Chicago, after Passover, I could go to the kosher bakery because I knew that the challah was cooked or baked that night or after sundown. Here, I have a problem because I don't know when these challahs were born.
Right.
So there's been times where I haven't been eating bread or challah for a week.
So now you should do it differently. Put it in your buy it before Passover, freeze it, sell your chametz, and you can eat it literally the minute Passover's over.
Well, since the
But it's in
challah
your
was
house.
frozen anyway.
Yeah.
She does not.
Yes, that's the thing. My cabinet is part of this. Like you say, anything in the cabinet. I say any chametz in my office, any chametz in my property, I sell.
Can you get it back?
Yeah, after Passover. So I'll tell you, in Arizona, we're lucky. In Arizona, the sale that's happening is not done traditionally by the rabbi here. Let's say we use a rabbi that's based in another state, which means that they're doing their sale and then the return of sale before Passover ended here.
Here, right.
And so that rabbi only releases it when Passover is over here. So the rabbi will say, wait 30 minutes till Passover is over to eat it. But really, that's required in states where the rabbi did it because there's an actual contract that's going to happen to give it back.
Is it pre-written in the contract when it's gonna be over?
No, well, it says that the loan is due. So basically, there's a real down payment. It's a real contract. And it says in 8 days, you owe me the full amount. That's the incentive for the guy to not keep it, right? Because full amounts from 100 houses or 1,000 houses is a lot of money. So the rabbi lends him the money, like we'll carry. And then afterwards he says, I want to collect. So you know what? I'll give it back to you.
So if you sell it to somebody at a stage, obviously you can't ship it to them.
Right, but if the guy wanted to come here and look in your house, because all the addresses are there.
So you're
So
not
someone
really,
from another state only comes to you
Correct.
now.
theoretically.
No, you're actually selling because of contracts. That's,
Yeah, but you're not, okay,
it hasn't moved out of your house. He owns it in your house.
And you can still have it in your pantry.
It's his. Think about it. I can walk into any supermarket and see chametz. It's not mine. I can go into my friend's house who doesn't keep kosher and isn't Jewish and see all their non-kosher for Passover items. That's not what it means that you can't see chametz. It means in your own home.
Right.
We do close those cabinets traditionally, you know, people
Yes.
will kind of mark it with tape or something.
Yeah.
Because the natural instinct of a person is that if for 358 days of the year you eat bread, naturally you don't think twice when you grab stuff. If it's your morning routine, I always have a pastry. So it's a protection. It's like, oh, that extra seal
Well, it's a
stops
word that in your home, won't open your.
Right.
mail. That's my
That too.
mistake.
But that's the idea. Right. Yes, that's the
Yes.
reason. It was a visual like stop. Yeah.
So the mitzvah of the eating of matzah after sundown,
After nightfall.
nightfall, excuse me. They say you shouldn't eat matzah before Passover.
All right.
Is it for 3 days?
So the custom for many people is a month, but for sure not on the day of. That's for sure.
So is that
Mhm.
why that?
That's in order that you should have the flavor. You shouldn't have the flavor already in your mouth. It should be a new flavor.
So you'll enjoy it more.
If you enjoy it, I know you do, but it's the people who don't, it's just part of the kind of having that appetite for it. Which is also why it says you shouldn't eat like later in the day because you should come hungry to the meal,
Right.
so you can enjoy the meal.
Like 11:32 or something.
Well, that would be not eating chametz,
Right.
but you can eat
Right.
food, you know, regular food, kosher for Passover after that.
Like
But you shouldn't have a dinner before the dinner.
Right.
That's the idea.
Well, we have people coming from work and they're not gonna be sitting patiently waiting for the meal while we're doing.
So you could give them nosh.
We do, we do that.
Finish something first.
Okay.
Like-
Wait, you're saying you just make sure that they are all good. Karen, do you have any questions?
10-10s, which are not,
None, thank you.
All right,
they're not really kosher. Whatever.
but this is kind of the thing that I always share for Pesach. Number one is if you can eat matzah after nightfall. Number two, and maybe very important, is sell your chametz. It's free. Literally takes 2 minutes of your time, and you're doing a mitzvah by not owning chametz on Passover. By doing. I'll send a link for that.
Okay. The kebab. You can
Yeah,
order
I will
kebab
send you a
anytime.
link today or tomorrow. There's a link coming out from
No,
us.
Last week it came.
No, but I'm saying that will come
Oh.
from me with a link.
Yeah.
Yeah, you'll get it in the mail,
What's-
get it on email.
How
So
is
fill out this
thing with
coupon.